All right, good morning, guys. This is your little mini lesson on quadratics. Today, for this skill, we are solving quadratic equations by taking square roots, factoring, or using the quadratic formula. So a little helpful hint here, quadratic formula, really, really important. There are a few questions where it talks about if there are two real solutions, or do you get one real solution or two imaginary solutions, and you have to just pick and choose. And I just wanted to remind you that one thing that you could do is graph the equation on your calculator. And if there are two real solutions, then you should see that quadratic equation having two real x values, x1 and x2, where it crosses the x-axis. One real solution means that it's just touching the x-axis, and there's only one point of intersection. And if it has two imaginary solutions, then, well, it's lovingly called a floater. It's floating above or floating below the x-axis, and therefore it doesn't have any real x-intercepts. So just a reminder, you can set your quadratic equation equal to 0 and then graph it to figure out pretty quickly if it has two real solutions or not. So just a thought. And of course, if you wanted to make your own little whiteboard, you could do that using a sheet protector and a piece of paper. And some expo markers is pretty handy. Or of course, trust your rusty paper to show your work, because you are going to want to show your work. We have the quadratic formula here, but we're going to do some quick review. Solve the quadratic equation using the method indicated. And again, as you're writing this stuff down, I'm just going fast because these are mini lessons. If you need to pause, pause. If you need to rewind, rewind. You have that capability. Using the method indicated, so this is solving using the square root method. So whenever we're doing the square root method, our goal is to isolate whatever is being squared. And remember, don't forget the plus or minus, okay? So the first thing we want to do is move the 81. And then we're going to go ahead and divide by 3. 3 goes into 81 2 times, and 7. Okay. And then we need to square root both sides. And when I take a square root, I'm not going to forget the plus or minus. And this is a great problem because it is going to want you to simplify any radicals. And on some of these, it's going to say round your answer to the nearest hundredth. On some of them, it may or may not allow you to do that on here. But I do want to remind you how to simplify square roots. We're going to break any square root apart into perfect squares if we can. So I know that 27 is 9 times 3, and 9 is a perfect square. So the square root of 9 pops out as a 3, and this 3 is left over inside. So I think in the answer field for this one in IXL, you would have to type in 3 radical 3, comma, negative 3 radical 3. It usually says separate multiple answers with a comma. And of course, if it says round to the nearest hundredth, well, then you could just type in your calculator with a radical. Radical 27, so I would say 5.20 probably, and negative 5.20. But usually it's going to want an exact answer. All right, so factoring. Factoring is look for the greatest common factor, always, always, always. And then if you can't do a GCF, maybe we can double bubble. So factoring is double bubbling or greatest common factor. On this one, I only see 2 terms, and this would be the greatest common factor. So the GCF here, I can divide both of these by 2, and they also each have a U. So I'm going to take out a 2U. We are undistributing. When I take out that 2U, I have a U left over, and minus 60 divided by 2 is 34, and the U is gone. Again, you can double check because we're just distributing. 2U times U gives me 2U squared. 2U times negative 34 is negative 68U. And from here, we would set each bubble, or each factor, equal to 0. So I would get U equals 0 for one solution, and U equals positive 34 for another. So in the answer field, I would type 0 and 34 for my solutions. 0, 34. All right, on C, we are factoring a trinomial. There is no GCF, so I'm going to go straight to double bubble, and you really want to remember that you need to check the rainbow to make sure that this works. So I'm going to just go ahead and set up my structure for double bubbling. And I'm going to ask myself, hey, what times what is 4y squared? And maybe you're thinking, oh, well, that's 2y times 2y. And then last times last has to be negative 9. So what times what is negative 9? Not a lot of choices there. But positive 3 and negative 3, I guess, is an option. So we don't necessarily know if that's correct. I have to check the rainbow. So I'm going to multiply. 2y times negative 3 is negative 6y. And here, oh, we get positive 6y. And those do not add together. They give me a 0. So that was the wrong way to factor. So let me try again. I wanted to do this one because the number in front makes it a little more challenging. The 2's didn't work here. So I'm going to keep it. 4y times y gives me 4y squared. Then last times last is supposed to give me negative 9. I could try 3 and negative 3 again, but maybe I can just use 9 and 1. So I'm going to do positive 9 and negative 1. And I'm going to check the rainbow to make sure that my middle term appears. So I have 4y times negative 1, which is negative 4y. And then 9 times y is 9y. And 9y minus 4y does give me that middle term of 5y. So that is the proper bubbles. And so now I can solve by setting each bubble, each vector equal to 0. So here I get y equals 1. And here I'm going to subtract the 9 and divide by the 4. You can give answers as fractions. I just use the forward slash, just like that. So they just need to be reduced. So if you can reduce your fraction, you do need to reduce it. So I would type negative 9/4, comma, 1 in the answer field. Reduce, 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 simplify, simplify, simplify. And that's probably the hardest part of IXL. You really learn how to simplify. Here, they're asking us to solve using the quadratic formula. And so, in order to use the quadratic formula, I need it to be equal to 0. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is subtract 9 so that my equation is set equal to 0. And now I can see that I have my A value of 4, my B value of negative 2, and my C value of negative 9. And then I can just use the quadratic formula to solve. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And yes, you do need to memorize that. That is definitely one of the things you must know in life. Okay, so if I'm going to solve this, then I am going to do the opposite of b, which is going to be positive 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared. It is the quantity of negative 2 squared. Watch those parentheses. If it should be a positive result, always, always. Minus 4 times a times c. I usually multiply together in my head. So 4 times negative 9 is negative 36. All over 2 times a. And again, I'm just going to do that in my head. 2 times 4 is 8. So I get x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared is 4. I'm going to use my calculator here. 4 minus 4 times negative 36. There we go. So I'm just typing in that whole radicand there, everything under the radical. Negative 2 times negative 2 gives me that positive 4 right there. And we can see we get 148 over 8. Now, here's the beauty. You do not have to type in this craziness. It actually says round to the nearest hundredths. And that's kind of nice. However, you do have to know how to put that in your calculator. So be very, very careful. I would say make sure you put the whole entire numerator in parentheses. And remember, there are 2 answers. You also don't necessarily have to simplify this radical. 148 definitely has some pairs you can take out to simplify the radical. I'm going to go ahead and just type it in so I can get my answer rounded to the nearest hundredth. So 2 plus the square root of 148. Now all of that is in the numerator divided by 8. And I get 1.77. And then I'm going to do the same thing. And I can just pull up the same old entry, second entry, and change it to 2 minus radical 148 over 8. And I get negative 1.27, rounded to the nearest hundredths. All right? And so that, I think, is all you need to do on quadratic formula. All right. You guys should be all set for the C-level skills that I've assigned. Again, look for those yellow stars. And again, your goal is an 85 or higher. Whenever you feel like you're done, just close the program. You don't have to sit there and wait until you get 100, which could take hours. 85 is good enough. 90 is fantastic. All right, folks, have a good day.